Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. The new year 2023 is pretty much around the corner and the year 2022 is coming to an end. And in today's program, we're going to take a general stock of the state of affairs in Pakistan and the major challenges the country had to face in 2022. Pakistan had to face multiple challenges at multiple fronts that included political uncertainty, economic difficulties, climate-induced catastrophe, a revival of cordial relations with the major world powers as well as the friendly countries, the population growth, and most recently, the resurgence of terrorism. Now, the incumbent government, the coalition government led by PMLN in Pakistan had been trying to deal with and address these challenges up front. But at the same time, collective wisdom and responsibility is also required to tackle all these issues. And what were the major challenges in 2022 for Pakistan? How they were dealt with, and what are the likely challenges in the coming year in 2023, and how those challenges could be converted into opportunities and positive outcomes. We'll be looking into all these questions, and to talk about this, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik. He's senior analyst. Mr. Malik, thank you very much for your time, for being on Views on News. Really appreciate that. And we are also honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Amir Hussain. He's a senior journalist. And Mr. Hussain, thank you very much for your time also, for being on Views on News. We are also honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Aniq Zafar. He's political analyst. Mr. Zafar, thank you very much for your time, also for being on Views on News. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Malik. What do you think, what were the major challenges Pakistan had to face specifically in 2022?
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's very important to review the challenges that our country has been facing throughout this year, because in all possibilities, in the coming year, all these challenges will continue to haunt us. And maybe there are a few additional things, and the present challenges would remain, and rather, in all probability, their intensity may increase if timely measures are not put in place. First and foremost, to me, is the national security challenge. We have a declared enemy on our eastern border. We have to be prepared 24/7 for that. Then we have, as you have mentioned in your intro, on our western border, we have a country which is not our enemy, but it remains, to be an undeclared hostile attitude of that country, and the people in the shape of outfits like TTP, which we have seen very recently that there is a lot of increase in their scope and display of their sleeper cells, which were presumably they were taken care of, most of them after Zarb-e-Azab, but now they claim to have a new vigor and a new strategy to create unrest and turmoil in our country. And the second thing is the economy. Of course, economy has its linkages with political stability, and it has its effect on the national security also. And in economy particularly, the energy crisis is a global phenomena, but its impact on Pakistan and Pakistan's industry and economy has been devastating. So we have to negotiate, and within the course of our discussion we will talk about that. And of course, now we have the political uncertainty which continues, and there are chances that it will continue to haunt us.
We'll be talking about that one in detail. Mr. Amir Hussain, what do you think, what were the major challenges in 2022 for Pakistan?
Well, some of them were already put forth by Mr. Malik very lucidly. I think Pakistan has faced multidimensional challenges, because one was, of course, the economy that had gone into recession, the global economy, which has ripple impacts on the global different economies. Pakistan was one of the economy that suffered a lot, and the COVID impact was still continuing in 2022 as well. We have also seen that the huge devastation taken place by climate-induced disasters in the country. The floods of 2022, the magnitude was so high, and the magnitude was so abrupt that we have seen the adverse impact on the poor of the country in particular. So Pakistan lost $30 billion worth of economic damages because of this global climate disaster that we are facing. So then, of course, terrorism is another challenge because Pakistan is fighting terror on different fronts, and the terrorism has been, thanks to the security apparatus, we have been able to overcome, but still, I mean, it's a big challenge still.
There's been a resurgence
it keeps
in the
coming
recent
back,
months.
the resurgence of the terrorists and the TTP and other outfits. I think that was another challenge that Pakistan was facing. And also we have seen the political agitation, instability coming from different directions. The outgoing PTI government, despite coming to terms and sitting with parliament and working on a common agenda for economic revival, they have been into the streets trying to add more salt into injury of this particular crisis that was coming forth. I think that
especially at a time when the country was faced with so many challenges
Absolutely.
at the same time. Let me bring Mr. Zafar into the discussion also. Mr. Zafar, what do you think were the major challenges? Do you agree with the both participants already, the challenges they have described?
Obviously, economy, politics, and security situation. These are the three fundamental challenges which Pakistan has faced most of its history. We are not new to it. But what is new is that each time we get into a crisis, it appears that the magnitude of the crisis is larger than the previous crisis. For example, the crisis of economy, the BOP crisis, the balance of payment crisis, the trade deficit and all that is much larger than it used to be. For example, Pakistan's economic problems are always termed as cyclical problems, because these problems have returned to Pakistan every 4th or 5th year. We managed to sustain the economy for a few years. We develop. The moment we start growing with a sustained pace, the demand increases so much and the consumption increases so much, consumption of energy and other imported goods, that the country again goes into a tailspin because we cannot finance all that consumption. We have a very low export base. We rely heavily on remittances and then foreign funding through different multilateral donors or bilateral donors.
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Please complete.
So on the security front, I think it's time to ask hard questions, because when last year in Afghanistan Taliban took over, we in Pakistan, most of the people were very happy that finally there will be stability in the region, there will not be any war going on, US has left, so the major cause of conflict, which we thought that is the cause of conflict, will go away.
It should have ideally been over by then,
Yeah,
because the war was waged by the Afghan Taliban over there in Afghanistan against the international troops.
That was
we'll be coming to this point later on in the show. Mr. Malik, how detrimental do you think it was, the politics of agitation and confrontation and the political uncertainty for the overall smooth functioning of democracy in the country?
Actually, if we see in our political or democratic history, democracy is through election to the parliaments. Except for the 1970 election, which was regarded as fair and free election, and that too the results were not honored in a way that the legitimate stakeholders were not handed over power at the center. All elections have been or have been made to believed as controversial, and we always end up contesting the authenticity and validity of most of the seats in every election. In past 10 years, for example, I mean, the previous parliament and the current parliament, the elections were not accepted by the opposition. And it was throughout these 10 years, we see that people have been raising.
So what does that call for? Call for the electoral reforms in general?
Actually, we need to do, like 1973 Constitution is one document on which all parties, regardless of their, orientation, whether they were socialist or they were, middle, the course, or they were extreme right parties, everybody agreed and signed that document. There has to be some electoral reforms which ensure that it is structured in a manner and it is implemented in a manner that everybody has
a trust in it.
Has
a trust in it. Mr. Amir Hussain, when we talk about the impacts of political uncertainty, about the smooth functioning of democracy and the smooth functioning of the institutions, how detrimental it had been during the past year in particular?
I think it has been really, really detrimental because we were having crisis and problems from multiple fronts. So when people don't see political stability, investors will not come to your country, investment will fly out, and also their economy will not function, as your stock market keep crashing for many times. This 2022, because the perception of political crisis, the perception instability leads to economic crisis automatically. So that the result of that multiply the impact on our overall, the standing in 2022. And the second important thing is that if you cannot make long-term plans, because if you have some level of political stability, there is a democratic norms in the system. Every party, every political force, they believe in a democratic way of engagement, then you can go for long-term planning. The long-term planning is one area where we used to have 5-year planning. As you remember, Pakistan has 8 times we had 5 years plannings, which worked well. But now we don't see this long-term planning coming on because we do too much constituency politics. Statesmanship is required. The statesmanship comes when there is this culture, the value, the ethical framework of democracy, which says that all parties must respect the constitution, come together, sit on a table, develop a consensus on larger national issues. You can do political opposition on your political agendas, but on the larger issues of economy, energy crisis, larger issues of overall the shape of the country, you have to come together. The security concerns that we have from all directions, so we have to have a charter of economy, security, and political stability. So that was lacking in 2022. That's why we have a lot of challenges.
That was primarily because of the politics of agitation and confrontation. Now, Mr. Zafar, when we talk about this particular demand by the opposition group that resorted to politics of agitation remains to be the early elections. Now the government categorically has given the reasons. There has been devastating floods in 1/3 of the country was affected, and a larger population was also affected. It incurred huge economic losses and damages. At the same time, the other reason was that the new census results were awaited also, and they had a certain time limit to that one as well, which are expected by the end of March and April. And till those results are not released, the new delimitation won't be possible. So naturally, the elections are perceived to be happening on their due date in October 2023. So do you think this demand of early elections, given these circumstances, had been justified?
Well, principally, demand of an early election by an opposition is not a bad thing per se. But again, as you explained and you very well put it out, that what are the circumstances right now? Does the country afford it? Does the situation afford it? Do we really understand what are the challenges right now? I think, and then again, the question is that people who are demanding elections, do they have any solution for these challenges? If you ask me personally, that currently the situation is that no single party will be able to handle anything. there needs to be a larger consensus, as my friend said, on a number of issues like economy, security, even on democratic norms, on the constitutional processes. We are running to the courts, the political parties are running to the courts every other day because they have stopped engaging with each other. The opposition and the government are not engaging. Opposition needs to understand that it is too difficult to blackmail a government. Government, after all, is government and it is sitting in power. So whatever you want to achieve, you achieve through negotiations. You cannot achieve anything through protests alone, right? So this has to be understood by the major opposition leader.
A point very pertinent that you've just highlighted. Now, this politics of agitation and confrontation had obviously an economic cost attached to it as well, Mr. Malik.
Definitely, they complement each other. Political instability and economic, problems, they complement each other, and it is the result of political instability affects on economy, and economics issues are also being put as a part of the agitation. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not only 2022. The same issues were being discussed in the previous years as well. So we really need a broad-based consensus to deal with our security issues and our economic issues.
So do you think the government has often talked about the Charter of Economy? Does it mean the continuity of policies? And do you think the Charter of Economy would provide a roadmap for sustainable prosperity and development in the country in the years to come?
Yes. But before we talk about that, we need to flag another point. As my colleague just mentioned about the golden era of Pakistan's history of the 60s that we talk about, where there was economic growth, where there was industrialization and enhanced agriculture sector. We had economist by the name of Dr. Mahbubul Haq, whose books were practiced and by Korea, and they were being taught in the universities. But unfortunately, after that, we have hardly had any economist making plans for us.
So but don't you think that a particular formula or the kind of idea, as you have just mentioned, Dr. Mahbubul Haq laid forth, and obviously everybody knows that 60s is called the development decade for Pakistan. So can't that one be applied also at this moment?
You see, if your strategy is focused on the election, which is a 5-year tenure, which practically gives any government maybe 4 years to plan and then implement and then see the fruition of the projects. It's too small a time. That is why the continuity and sustainability model, which was provided by 5 years plan, they were integrated with each other, and that is why we saw the mega projects like Tarbela and Mangla coming up. Unfortunately, in the last about 30 or 40 years, we have had not economists, but most of the time, I would say, with due respect to all of them, that we had financial managers, most of them bankers, some of them having their background of IMF and World Bank. So they were just manipulating figures to give a comfort to the ruling elite,
right,
and promises to the masses.
Right. Mr. Amir Hussain, how crucial is this idea of forming a Charter of Economy and implementing it? And when we talk about the development decade for Pakistan in the 60s, do you think that formula is still applicable?
Absolutely, because Pakistan had a vision, long-term vision. When you had 5-year planning, and then we were also talking about Human Development Index of Dr. Mahbubul Haq. The development trajectory Pakistan set was there were multiple 5-year plans, a continuation of the planning, because we don't talk about a 5-year plan that with the new government it goes away and then the new plan started. It continued for 3-4 decades, and then we saw the fruit. Now we have a number of lessons learned. When we talk about Charter of Democracy, Charter of Economy today, the Charter of Economy, the fundamental concept of Charter of Economy is a long-term continuation of policies and planning. And that is the Charter of Economy. Because
so that doesn't necessarily require a certain particular government to remain more than 5 years. No,
absolutely.
there should be rotation.
You know,
but
democracy must keep going, but at the same time, your economy, the continuation of economic policy is very important, because you know we live in a global world. The global market fluctuation impact us. We have become an import-driven economy. We import $53 billion worth of different goods, and we export only $25 billion. So huge deficit. And then we have this remittances, 30 billion coming in, which we try to fill up the gap. But still, we have to improve our export capacity. We have number of areas of comparative advantage. We have textile, we have agro products and all that. So we have energy resources. We can produce 70,000 megawatt of hydropower. Hydropower is a huge resource we don't use. We import the fossil fuel, which is a huge burden for our economy. And we also import the gas, LPG, and 64% of electricity is generated from the fossil imported fuel, while we have our own capacity of generating and exporting the electricity. Why don't we?
So what about shifting to the renewables, and also the idea of solarization?
Yeah.
Most recently, the Prime Minister has
Absolutely.
laid forth also.
You have to mix. This is called energy mix. In energy mix, we only use 4% of renewables right now. We have 24% of hydropowers, but we have to gradually shift to that. It will not take place in one time, but again you need a long-term planning.
Right.
If you have 10 years planning and you can shift your from fossil fuels to renewable, you will become a prosperous country.
Right. Mr. Zafar, how to develop that realization among all the stakeholders, especially when it comes to the political stakeholders, that this is the time to form a consensus and have a sort of a document in form of Charter of Economy to steer the country out of its dire economic challenge?
Well, that is a million-dollar question, that how to bring all these people on a table, put them in a room and ask them to come out after they have agreed to some fundamental questions and solutions to the challenges of this country. Politics is always about some contested ideas. But in Pakistan, the problem is that the politics is not about contested ideas. It is a contest of personalities. It is a contest of who is the worst. So this has become a debate between who is the worst, and choose me because I may be better than them.
So how
it
is
is
the
not about ideas. Problem is that we are not discussing ideas. In our politics, we are discussing personalities. We are not discussing economic ideas. We are not discussing how to utilize our resources. We are not discussing what is our policy about our youth. How are we going to provide food, education, jobs to a large number of youth which is coming up. So this is what is happening in politics. Coming to the Charter of Economy, the Charter of Economy, we haven't seen what the proposal is, right? It is just being talked as a single word, Charter of Economy, but what is the fundamental idea of it? What principles you want to adhere to? As some of my friends were saying here, do we need to go back to the planned economies? Planned economies was a concept which is 60s, which is 50s. The world has moved on. There are no planned economies in the world now. Everyone is saying that the free market decides its momentum itself. The government has a role of only facilitating. So if we decide that we are going to the planned economies, maybe that does not work in the modern world, because now the capital flows, the labor market, everything has changed. So we need to see what is the proposal on the Charter of Economy.
That still needs to be revealed, but it is conditioned with the agreement or the kind of realization among the opposition ranks that it should sit with the government to talk about it and negotiate and sort out a solution out of it. Now, when we talk about overall economic situation of the country, there is a very important element, very less talked about on the mainstream media also. The United Nations Population Fund has said that Pakistan's population is growing at the annual rate of 1.9%. The more the heads you get, the more headcount you get in a certain economy, so more resources would be required to be utilized. How to strike a balance, and what needs to be done in order to check that particular annual growth rate in population in Pakistan?
Unfortunately, this is one issue which would, have impact on any, infinite number of resources or planning or whatever you call it. But unfortunately, we don't talk about that. Because there are certain elements in the society, who take, their own interpretation of the, religious thought on that, and we, have virtually, all the governments, they have succumbed to that pressure groups, and we don't talk. And unless we talk, the Human Development Index or per capita or water resources available per capita, they all will be divided by the population. So if we keep growing, whereas most of the countries either they have zero or minus growth rate, the kind of growth rate we have now of the population, we need a sustained economic growth rate of around 9%. We have never had, except for a very brief periods in certain specific eras where we had dollars inflow in Pakistan, we never could achieve that growth rate. So how are we going to match? So nobody talks about that. So that is what we are saying once we say that we need to develop a consensus, that there are issues like, for example, our foreign policy issue. How are we going to deal with the superpowers? How are we going to have relations with India? Kashmir issue, the Israel issues, these are 4 or 5 few important issues of our security or foreign policy. So they should be continued regardless who is sitting
in the power.
now,
right, Mr. Amir said, and now the United Nations Population Fund says that Pakistan is among a few countries that have a detailed population policy and program roadmaps at federal and the provincial levels. Now, it is time to translate these plans into actions, and all stakeholders must join hands to accelerate the implementation of these policies and programs. What needs to be done in this regard? How to implement?
I think our demography is very important. It's also a dividend if you have a well-educated, population. The big population is sometimes a blessing, but we see that we have a growing population without proper education, without proper nutrition, and the resources that the limited resources that we have as a country, we need to rethink that our population growth must be. If you are growing in 1%, your economy is growing as 1%, and your population is growing 1.9%. It means that it's a huge drain on the economy. So I think we have to think about this national population. Framework is there. Pakistan has different policies already being adopted, but we need to implement them, because it's a big question. I mean, you have to educate people. People sometimes resist population growth control because of many reasons, and the message must go out and clear to many people.
At the very grassroots levels, Mr. Zafar, there is another statement by the
last thing.
Please.
I would like to add
Please
that
go ahead.
at the union council and district level, there are different organizations working for population control. The government must, support them and build their capacity and provide the enabling environment for them to work for the population.
Right. How to spread awareness at the grassroots level among those particular communities who happen to be resistant to this particular idea of controlling the population, or going for the family planning?
I would say that the primary tool which we can use is to engage the gatekeepers of the community. By gatekeepers, I mean teachers, the Imam Masjid. Somehow we have to convince our religious elite, the class of ulama, or bring them on board on this issue, that Pakistan needs to now implement all its policies. As rightly pointed out by UNFPA, that Pakistan has a very robust policy, but the problem is in implementation. How to take it to the grassroots, how to convince people that poverty is a curse and increasing population means
Don't you think
poverty
in
increasing.
this digital age, for spreading this sort of awareness, more reliance should be on the digital platforms because everybody has access to the
Of
internet
course, you
rather
can-
than
you
going
can
for
use
the
that,
conventional
but
ways
the problem,
for that?
problem is that the digital platforms, on the digital platforms where you have positive messaging, you have almost double the number of negative messaging. So how to that is a big challenge. That how to make available positive messaging for the people so that they do not consume negative messaging, because the people who are giving out negative messages on the issue of population and convincing people that no, it is our religious duty to be more in number, to rule the world or whatever. They also have available those platforms.
Right,
so until unless you have those gatekeepers and those people neutralized, you won't be able to.
Unfortunately, we are short of time and we have to talk about so many other things. Now, the climate-induced catastrophe, the floods of biblical proportion Pakistan witnessed this time around, and with huge economic losses and damages, there was a phenomenal response by the United Nations in particular that launched 2 flash appeals. How had been the response of the international community to this particular thing, because Pakistan is among the top 8 countries to have been affected the most by the climate-induced catastrophes, yet emitting less than 1% of the carbon emissions?
You see, this is a debate, and obviously it will continue to go on that who is responsible. But the fact is
the United Nations Secretary General categorically said that it is the developed world, the price of which the developing countries are paying.
But unfortunately, if the funding for the United Nations to its own sustenance comes from those, developed countries, United Nations will never be able to, do any service to us in this regard. We have to get out of this, mindset, and we have to really take measures for our own future.
That requires a cost, a considerable cost. That's why the idea of climate justice, and then there was the establishment of the loss and damage fund also.
Just allow me 2 minutes. You see,
please go ahead.
My master's qualification is in disaster risk management, and I have worked in the same field for a couple of years now. My only submission is that the climate change and global warming, these are the realities. Right, but how we have to manage, that is the issue. Unfortunately, in the year that we are reviewing right now, we had floods. Out of all the natural calamities, flood is the most predictable, natural disaster. It has a pattern. The intensity may vary. It gives you sufficient early warning. But we have not been able to, starting from the massive flood of 1953, I am talking about the West Pakistan only, 1953, then 73, in 90s, 2010, 2012, and
we have to deal with this problem ourselves. That's what you.
Yes,
unfortunately, we are short of time. I have to jump.
We have to, induct it in our long-term planning, because all these things can be mitigated through proper implementation.
Mr. Amir Hussain, the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund at the United Nations level, that was a clear victory and a major win for the Pakistan's climate diplomacy. What needs to be done to sensitize the international community on that front more?
Well, I think one of the key successes was the COP27, where Pakistan was able to put together a very good discourse on climate change. And I think it's a continuous engagement again, because there is a global debate going on reparation, because 400 years of industrial growth in the Western countries, they have polluted the whole world. And now it is our turn to become industrialized, and we are now facing a lot of challenges. That's why we say that it's not only about that what we can do, it is also about what others have done to damage the environment. So that is the reparation that we need to put. The debate this time has been very important. Pakistan climate change policy has been
very successful.
Very successful, and
right.
also added something on reparation as well. That's
right. Mr. Zafar, your take regarding this particular success of Pakistan's climate diplomacy at the UN?
Of course, everyone accepts that this was a huge success. Even Western media has has praised diplomacy of Pakistan in this field. Our climate minister was appreciated that she led the case of the developing countries from the front. That is, of course, a huge success. But next, the question is that will it translate into action?
Right.
And to translate this into action, what we need is that, as Honorable Air Marshal said, that we need to plan. On our side, we need to plan, and we need to present proper detailed plans to the world community that this is what we want to do and this is what we need funds for. Otherwise, what we will be doing is that we will be again and again going back to them for emergency funds. No, we need to seek funds for planning how to avert these disasters.
Right, Mr. Malik, one very important issue, the recent resurgence of terrorism in different parts of the country, Pakistan being the front-line ally in the war on terror for the international community for the last 2 decades. We facilitated the Afghan peace and reconciliation process also. There was a lot of expectation that after the international troops withdrawal, the Afghan Taliban would be taking some concrete action and wouldn't allow the Afghan soil to be used against any other country, particularly Pakistan. What needs to be done in order to curb the resurgence of terrorism in the country once again?
I think we must exert ourselves at diplomatic level on the Afghan government, because these were the promises, which was the commitment which was given to us at that time. And if they do not comply, then we have the wherewithal. Only the political will is required. We can take on these people across the border. And if the current government in Afghanistan or in Kabul, they cannot ensure that TTP does not use their soil as a launching pad for us, we must take those targets
by ourselves. Right. Mr. Amir Hussain, what happens to be the role of international community and major world powers in order to impress upon the Afghan Taliban to fulfill their commitment?
Well, I think the one thing is very clear: the international community must engage Taliban, because they were left alone, and there are a lot of problems. You need to reconstruct the country. You need to engage them. You need to impress upon them that if you want to live in the international community, you have to follow the international humanitarian rules and the norms. And then Pakistan must be supported in its efforts at the foreign front as well to do diplomatic engagement at the larger level.
Right, Mr. Zafar, your take regarding this particular, how to impress upon Afghan Taliban, especially in order to make them fulfill their commitment?
I think we will need to go back to the question that when we were dealing with the Afghan Taliban post their takeover of Kabul, and when we were seeking their guarantees against TTP, what were those guarantees? And what was in our mind that how will we enforce these guarantees? If we had some mechanism in our mind, I think it's time to engage and start that mechanism to impress upon the Afghan Taliban that, okay, if you are not doing this, then we have to do it as
and as Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari also categorically said that we reserve the right to take a direct action in this regard. One last very brief comment, Mr. Malik, for the year 2023.
We must pray that all these challenges that we have just discussed today, the better sense prevail in all quarters, and all stakeholders they think above their political objectives. They think for Pakistan, and everybody works together to mitigate these challenges.
Mr. Amir Hussain,
think for Pakistan, implement the Charter of Democracy and Charter of Economy, and go forward, move forward, and this huge future for us.
Mr. Zafar.
Come together for this country. That's it.
Right, indeed. From the entire discussion, we can conclude that Pakistan has been faced during the last year with immense challenges, and the government had been dealing and trying to address these all issues upfront on war footing. But at the same time, the consensus among all the major political stakeholders in the country is required collective wisdom, and the responsibility is also the need of the hour. And that is all from today's Views on News. Until the next one, take good care of yourselves.